Welcome back, Watchbangers, to this lazy weekend. My name is Andre here on the Berlin Time channel. I'm glad that you're joining me. This video is a bit more personal. This is a video about how I found and how I fixed my dad's watch. And I've had this footage lying around for ages, so I think it's going to be quite the late surprise for my dad and for you guys, because you guys are seeing it now for the first time as well. So yeah, I'm making myself a lovely thickness tea, is what we call it in German, because I am a bit sick. But that will not stop me from delivering some nice content for you guys and a cool watch. Now to the story behind this watch. Now, a few years ago, I bidded on a eBay lot of Junghans watches, and I surprisingly won. It was like one of those heart racing moments. I think it was one of the first times I ever bid on eBay. Quick before I forget, it is almost 7 here. I'm an early bird today. And yeah, I won the lot and I got a bunch of stuff. One of the watches was the watch in this little plastic box here. Another one was the watch I made for my brother. I think I even made a video about it. Link is on the right here if you're interested. But anyways, this watch just laid around for a while in my drawer until I realized, oh, my dad's birthday is coming up and he doesn't have a mechanical watch. Why not? Because this watch is kind of classy and my dad's also classy. But this watch, as you can see, needs quite the work. As you can see, there's a bunch of grime and like black damage on the bottom of the dial, which is pretty interesting. It's missing a seconds hand as well, and the case has seen better days. I mean, the case is super scratched up here in the back, on the stainless steel back. And the gold plated rest of the case, which I assume is also just worn, and the crown is super used. I mean, this crown has like, there's literally no gripping strength on this crown left anymore. And when I tried to wind the watch, the crown just popped off just like this. So there's something wrong with the movement. And I mean, something with the setting system. We'll just have to open it up and see. Another thing which I noticed is that when I moved or shaked the case, the movement just rattled inside. So there was definitely something wrong. Let me just take the case opening knife and pry open the back to see what is inside and what's going on. And okay, this is definitely a first. I've never seen. Why is the ratchet wheel not screwed down? Okay, that is super weird. Okay, so the ratchet wheel is not screwed down. That is strange that I can't even see the screw. Maybe it's a bit deeper in the movement. But that's definitely one big thing. And there you can see the massive amount of shake this dial and movement has. And I think there's a movement ring missing. I mean, there's no markings on the inside of the case back, but I would assume that there was some sort of round circular movement ring or holder. And another thing which I noticed is that the screw for the setting lever is literally just upside down. I mean, the tap is just looking at me. So we can just flip this around, or we should be able to flip it around and screw it back down, and that could maybe solve the issue I had before with the stem just falling out. I mean, I will just check after the service, but that is definitely another interesting thing which I noticed. I mean, in total, from this standpoint, it's a non-runner. There's screws missing. There's stuff not screwed down. The screws are upside down. This is already such a wild starting position for this watch. And we flipped the watch over to see how badly damaged the dial is. And I mean, it is pretty extensive. The good thing is that's just around the edges, so you don't see it that much. That was also my first concern, but I think it should be fine. The crystal, however, does not look so fine. It's super scratched up, and I'm a bit worried if I can even find a replacement crystal, because this is a square crystal. It's domed, and it has like a really strange shape. So this is like the end boss of crystals. You would never find this again, but I hope I can polish it new. Regarding the case, it is pretty worn as well. As I said, the plating is slowly coming off, but I think I'll just polish it a bit with some jeweler's rouge cloth, and that will probably just give the shine back to the gold color. Oh, by the way, did I show you my new little parts box? This has, this is the usual container. I just added some like lashes, some hooks, which can hook into like these little posts and snap shut. I mean, the design isn't that good because the hooks are they break and break off pretty easily. But yeah, now I will label this project my dad's watch in Japanese, because my dad is Japanese. Otosa no Junghans. And the English translation down below. I apologize for my handwriting in English and in Japanese. And yeah, we can start with taking off the hands. As there's no seconds hand, we can just move the minute hand over the hour hand so they align nicely, making the removal much easier. Put a little plastic above it and use the Presto tool to lever both of them up. Let's take off the minute hand. The hour hand was a bit stubborn, so I had to go a second time and use my tweezer to pry it up a bit so it's loosened. And take that off. Now we can finally remove the loose ratchet wheel and the little setting lever screw, which fell out on the bottom. Now to remove the dial, we have to loosen the dial feed screws, which are on the side of the movement. There are these little screws usually, which are a bit hidden in the depth of this bore. And once that is done, we can just gently lift off to reveal the dial side, which looks pretty good in my opinion. It has like a super clean frosted finish, which I did not expect. What I did realize immediately is that the yoke has somehow jumped out of the sliding clutch there and wasn't engaging with the whole setting and winding system. So that is another problem I found. We can take off the little washer and the arrow wheel and snap the movement into the holder so that we can start disassembling the dial side. Now I must say the whole design of this thing, especially like the frosting and like the shapes of the bridge, for example here, the cover plate, I mean, it just shows what a nice manufacturing quality and level they had, I mean Junghans had in the past, because they used to be the largest watch manufacturer in the world sometime in the, I think 60s, 70s. I think they produced around 100,000 watches a day. It's crazy, a day. So I mean, they definitely had their capabilities, and the fact that they also had a bunch of in-house calibers and even chronograph calibers, and had quite a number of innovations over the years, just shows that they were a watchmaking powerhouse in the past that sadly has kind of flattened out in the last years, I must say. We can take off the yoke and the yoke spring. It did jump away, but I found it next to my working mat, so I was very lucky. And with that, the dial side is done. I mean, it was a very simple and minimalistic one. You can see that the dial, the shock protection system is very nicely made, in my opinion. They have, Junghans has these really big cap jewels, which really stand out, and the shock spring also just kind of accentuates that, in my opinion. To the movement side, you can see that the watch is not running. I tried to maybe even give it a bit of a go by shaking the movement, but it didn't help anything. And we'll start with the balance, I think, because that is the most sensitive part. That's the caliber number 687. And wait, the balance, it's kind of wobbly, in my opinion. Let's see. Let's check the end shake of that. Oh, yo, that, I think the pivot's broken off there, because that balance wheel should not have that amount of end shake. Let's take that off and see if we can even find a replacement online. I'll probably have to buy a donor movement and just replace the balance wheel completely, because I cannot make a balance staff yet, and I don't even know how. So that's that. Now we come to the click, kind of constructed nicely in like a little very minimalistic design. It's just this metal ring with 3 prongs. And the click spring goes in a groove underneath the ratchet wheel and the click, which is also a clever design. And the crown wheel here, in my opinion, is also very nicely done. I love the crown wheels, which have these big cover plates, which allow them to move underneath. Usually they only have 1 screw with a reverse tap, but this one has 2 screws with the normal tap. And I think the fact, because there are 2 screws, when you use the crown wheel, it kind of stops it from unscrewing itself. And let's take the wheel out. We can move on to the pallet fork. The pallet fork bridge here is also made in a super nice way. It's this curved shape, while other companies usually have like a bridge construction. This one has a nice curved shape, which is, I mean, it's a bit tricky to get out, but it just looks a bit nicer in my opinion. Let's take that off and remove the pallet fork. What I also noticed about this movement is that this movement has a bunch of markings. For example, on the bottom right, we have a B5. Under the balance cock, there's also a number, and this shows that they had, I mean, in my opinion, a pretty good documentation about when these parts were made and how they were made, and in my opinion, probably a pretty good quality control. We can remove my favorite part of these old watches, the cap jewels for the gear train. I mean, these are not usually there. Usually you just have, for example, this movement also has just 2 normal jewel bearings, but sometimes watch companies have these little cap jewels and these metal steel lids which come on top of these jewel bearings, and they just decrease friction when running in certain positions. For example, this cap jewel was on the escapement wheel, and since the escapement wheel is the wheel with the least power and the highest revolution or the highest turning speed, the decrease of friction is quite important so that the watch can run smoothly and accurately. After removing the gear train bridge, we can move to the barrel bridge. But coming back to the cap jewels, they just decrease friction. I see there's also a number 1 on the bridge underneath. Just another small detail. Oh, never mind, that's not a 1, but a 7 on that cover plate for the minute wheel. And let's take that off. A pretty nice solid construction here in my opinion. And I'm pretty sure that these numbers and stamps, they probably indicate from what batch of production these come from and what date they were made. I think I read somewhere that the number on the main plate and the one under the balance cock show the production, and the rest is probably just internal quality control. So the barrel is gone, the whole train wheel is gone, and yeah, I mean, the disassembly was super simple. This is also a nice beginner friendly watch, since it's just the normal 3-hand watch with no serious complications, not even a date. I mean, the only thing I could see maybe being a problem is in comparison to other Swiss calibers, for example, Junghans, the replacement parts aren't as readily available. I put the balance back on the main plate because I wash everything together, and for that I need to remove the shock protection system. So I'm trying to fidget out this big round golden spring, and I'm really afraid about putting these back in because I've had some of these springs and the arms of these, they break away super easily if you're not careful. So I will have to watch out for that. And I managed to get it loose, and we can just pull it out of the groove and take it off. And what I also mentioned before is that the Junghans has these really big balance wheels, which beat a bit slower, but they just look so much better. And you can also put these huge capstones in the shock protection systems. And I think you can see that also in the industry, that some of these high-end luxury companies, they go towards larger balances because they have this really big recognizable character if you see this really big balance wheel beating and the movement of your watch. On the back side, you just have a little time lapse of me doing the same thing. And of course, we'll just have a look into the barrel bridge here to see if we do need... Oh, yeah, okay, we have to turn it around because the lid opens on the other side. Let's press it open with the fingers and make the lid pop off. Put my tweezers in between there so we can pry it open. And look at the spring. I mean, the spring looks in a pretty good condition. There's no big real gunk or over lubrication, for example. Let's just check the inside of the... Okay, I mean, there's no big like end shake, for example, problem here. So I'll just take it out. Technically, I could just leave it in, but I just want to make sure, since it's my dad's watch, that everything is done once at least. So we can take this out, and for that we'll just grip the inside. This is, in German, this is called the rose of the mainspring. I'm not sure what it's called in English. If you guys have the right terminology, please let me know. And get that out of the barrel, and then we can just slowly use our fingers to unwind each coil of the mainspring, and we have to be careful not to let go of the whole mainspring itself, because if we let go, it would just unwind in an instant and the barrel would just fly through the room and probably just break through my window. Because the power in these mainsprings are pretty strong. Oh, it just flew away. I'm just going to check the inside of the barrel. Looks pretty fine. And the cores themselves, they're a bit unsymmetrical. I mean, they're not perfectly in a central circular shape, but the mainspring condition otherwise it's kind of flat. I mean, there's, for example, there's a small part which goes up. Otherwise, the mainspring shape does seem to be in a good condition at the end with the spring hook. There's also a slight bend upwards, but that's probably because of the tension put on it the whole time. So I won't replace it. We have disassembled the complete watch. We have the main plate here with the balance cock, the appropriate shock settings in their boxes so that they don't get lost or mixed up. The mainspring up there, the barrel, the pallet fork there, the gear train bridge here, an empty slot here, the cover plate for the minute wheel, the dial, the case, the barrel bridge with the gear train, then the winding system, then the front dial side cover plate systems, 2 empty boxes here, the stem, the hands, and then that's it. Now, usually I do this with the hand, but since I have my new watch cleaning machine, I'll just use the baskets here to load it all up and do it in a more kind of professional way. So let's open it up and I'll just put everything I have small parts baskets for example, more sensitive parts, i.e. the capstones, for example, or the pallet fork. And I'm not going to treat this in an ultrasonic before. I do have one. I have one of those small ones for like glasses, but I'm not sure. I don't have the right liquids for it yet, and I'm not sure if you would, for example, keep the pallet stone, the pallet fork, or the balance in that while you do it. So everything's loaded up into the cleaning baskets, and I've hooked it up, and we'll just start with a cleaning solution. This is Elma WF Pro, and this will probably just do a degrease and a thorough clean of every component. I'm not sure if this also kind of brightens the material, because some of the cleaning solutions have certain chemicals in them which give the metal back its shine. But I mean, I'd love it because it'll make it look better, but I'm not sure if it does. Now I have a timer on the right here. We'll do the cleaning and degreasing cycle for around 10 minutes. And once that is done, we'll switch to a rinse cycle. So we'll rinse off all the, I mean, it's grimy and dirty and probably a bit oily cleaning solutions and dirt which we got off there. And I'll firstly cycle the basket through, so we take as little of the cleaning solution into the rinse cycle as possible. And once we start this rinse cycle, we'll let this run for another 10 minutes again. And after the first rinse cycle is done, we'll have a second rinse cycle where we basically really rinse off all the residue of the first rinse cycle and the cleaning cycle. So this really just makes sure that all the watch parts are clean. And since these fluids don't have any water in them, so these are waterless fluids, we can be sure that these parts should not rust, technically. Obviously, I'll dry them as well. And I had a little mishap here with the wave breakers. So these are self-made. I only got one wave breaker when I bought this machine. And these just break the waves. Otherwise, they'll just be like a fluid vortex and everything. There will be way too much, as you can see, there will be way too much like movement in the jar. And yeah, I just had to quickly align it so they don't move around. Oh, okay, that worked out. And once I made sure that the second cycle is done, I'll spin it off and we can put a little jar under the cleaning basket just to make sure that no harmful chemicals, because these chemicals do really smell and stink, land on my coffee table. So, and once that is done, I'll just dry it off with a good old hairdryer. I sadly don't have a cool little drying attachment on my machine, but the hairdryer does its job, so we'll just blast all the parts with air for a few minutes to make sure that all the cleaning fluids and maybe even dirt or like dust get blown off. With that, we've cleaned the watch and we can come to the reassembly. I'll start with the barrel bridge. I'm lubricating the walls here with Möbius 8200. just to make sure that if there is any friction in the future, that maybe some of the lubrication might get it. And I'm putting a dab on the bottom of the barrel bridge so that when the mainspring slides over it, that there's less friction. For the mainspring itself, I'm lubricating it with some 90-20 as well, 80-20, I'm sorry, to make sure that the coils themselves, if they do rub against each other, that they are not scratching, for example, and that would technically take some amplitude away. I'm not sure if this is necessary though, because the modern mainspring alloys are self-lubricating, so this is probably the last time where I'm going to do it. Now to wind the mainspring back in, I have my nice mainspring winders, which I also showed on the channel, and I'm just going to use the, I think this is the 8er size, and take the arbor and press it into the center of the mainspring coils. Now, if you do this at home, please make sure that you wind it correctly, and make sure to usually take a picture or have a little drawing of the mainspring coils to know which direction you'll have to put the arbor on. After I made sure that the hook of the arbor is in the mainspring slot, I can just put this onto the whole contraption and slowly wind it up. It'd be nice to have some nice Bergeron mainspring winders. That is the brand which does all the high-end tools, but those are super expensive. And I mean, this also does the trick. I need to help the mainspring a bit not to get hooked on the last coil, and that could break it, but I managed to do it. And then we can turn back so that the arbor gets loose from the mainspring center, and we can slowly pull it out of the mainspring, keeping the mainspring in the mainspring winder in such a fashion. It looks fantastic. And then we can just press it on, press down on it, and make it fall back into the mainspring barrel. Looks almost as new. I mean, it doesn't look worse than before, so that's always a good sign. Put some grease on top, and then we will grease the mainspring arbor on the sides as well here for the lubrication inside the mainspring barrel, because this also does turn inside the barrel as it winds and unwinds. Press it into the center so that the latch gets hooked on, and we can press the whole thing back together. And with that, the barrel is done again. We move to the reassembly of the actual movement. I'm using these nitrile gloves because I don't have any finger cuts anymore, but I'm just doing this to make sure that the movement stays clean if I do happen to touch it. I put some HP 1300 for the lubrication of the minute wheel and the barrel arbor bearings in the main plate and the main plate bridge. I'm putting some on this surface as well, and then we can drop that right in. Then I covered it up with the minute wheel cover plate and screw it down. And I must say, I think the cleaning fluid did actually brighten the metal a bit, because the steel does look very shiny. And it's not only the steel, also, for example, the brass third wheel here has a lighter color than I remember having. So I definitely did have an effect on the parts, which is good. Now I'm lubricating the minute wheel from the top here, so that also has the HP 1300 oil, so the thicker oil. And I'm gonna continue by adding the barrel bridge cover, so the barrel bridge, onto the main plate, so that is locked down, and screw that down with the 3 screws. 1, number 2, and number 3. Now we come to the last wheel. This is the seconds hand wheel, which goes through the minute wheel, and we will top that up with the gear train bridge. And what I also did notice is that the countersinks of the jewels, for example, here on the front side, they're polished, which is insane. I mean, this movement has a decent amount of finishing for, I mean, I would say this wasn't the most expensive movement, but the fact that this is a I'd say semi-affordable movement and has this amount of detail to it is pretty insane in my opinion. Now we continue with the winding system. Here I'm lubricating the track for the crown wheel, which basically translates the power you get from the sliding clutch to the ratchet wheel. And I'm covering that up with the crown wheel cover and making sure that the screw holes align the taps in the barrel bridge. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to screw it down, obviously. I did butcher the screws here a bit though, to be honest. Now this can turn freely with a good amount of play, and I continue to the click. I put the click in first because when I move to the click spring, this might serve as a kind of a cover so that the spring doesn't fly away when I try to move it. And it worked out nicely because now the click spring is in place and the click is also above it. Now I can't forget to lubricate the barrel from the top. And I'm adding the ratchet wheel, and as I said before, to the amount of detail, this ratchet wheel, for example, even has a sunburst finish. So for the price I got this and what you could probably buy it for in the past, this movement has a very good amount of finishing with the frosting, the polishing, the sunburst finishes, the straight grain finishes. And I flipped over the movement to work on the dial side. I'm lubricating the minute wheel with some moly coat so I can press on the cannon pinion, which is pressed on with friction. So this really needs some force to be pressed on again. And the post for the setting wheel. And the intermediate wheel for the clutch right there. I'll add back in the cover plate and screw that on with the appropriate screw. And look at the shape of the cover plate. I mean, this curved shape, I mean, super. It just looks so good. Now, what I didn't record is the setting lever and how I screwed that on. We used the one screw which was flipped upside down at the start of the video, but the problem is that this is screwed in from the bottom. So don't forget to put that in. And once I screwed that on, you can see that the setting lever is able to move while being screwed on. Now we can put in the winding clutch and the sliding clutch, and I'll lubricate the post for the yoke with some moly coat. Now, so all these high friction points, for example, the cannon pinion, the yoke post, the sliding clutch friction points are all lubricated with moly coat because moly coat is the lubricant for high friction areas. Like, for example, there's lower friction areas like the jewel bearings for the escapement wheel, and they use a light oil, for example, and since this is like a really heavy steel on steel contact, you need some stronger lubrication. That's why you use the thicker moly coat. Now once the yoke is in place and engaging with the sliding clutch, I can put in the yoke spring so that there's a permanent tension on the yoke, and I'll lubricate this little post and the corner of the setting lever here, since they, in junction with the setting lever, setting plate cover, they basically decide the different positions this watch can have. So for example, the winding position or the crown in position, or if this watch would have a date complication, they would also be able to program that. So that's the important part. And this obviously also needs some moly coat since this is a pretty high steel on steel friction area. Obviously, I'll also lubricate the winding stem. I'm just gonna plaster it. There's almost every surface on this will have some friction or some contact with a metal. And press that back in. Oh, everything works. I can turn everything. That's always a good sign. And the positions are also there. So that's always a very good sign. Now coming back to the movement side again, I'm working on the pallet fork here. Here I'm lubricating the tip of the pallet fork stones. These engage with the escapement wheel, and I'm putting some very light oil, some Mobius 9010, onto the contact points, so the surfaces on the front. And when I'm putting it back in, you really have to make sure not to like get hooked on anything, because the oil can just spread and basically destroy the lubrication on the pallet fork. Once that's in its pivot hole, I place the pallet fork bridge on top and make sure that the pallet fork is also sitting in the appropriate jewel. And I'm just testing it by moving it back and forth to see if it goes freely. There we go. With a little power, you can also see that it kind of snaps from one side to the other. That means it's engaging. It's already engaging correctly. That's always a good sign. I'll put the balance back in here. This is a bit fidgety because I can't see a lot from behind the camera. But it looks like the balance really just wants to run again. Well, is it? Let's see if I can. I mean, there's still some. It kind of wants to go, but there's not enough power. Maybe once we put the capstones back on, it's a different story. Now, speaking of capstones and shock settings, we will start with the nameplate side. So we'll open the correctly labeled box and get everything out. So we have the jewel setting, so the part where the capstone goes in, and we have the capstone itself. And I'll just put them in some alcohol, some isopropyl alcohol, to give them a clean little wash after the washing machine. And I'm putting some 9-10 onto the surface of this and just dropping the capstone down and the setting onto it. Now the problem is the modern settings have like a little recess where the stone just perfectly falls into, but the older system here from Junghans, they do not have this recess, and that's why it's kind of dangerous. The jewel, the cap jewel could fall out, but after putting in, the watch starts running, so that's already a very good sign, since the watch has less friction due to the capstone in this position. And after assembling the shock setting from the balance and putting that back in, I'm just going to close up the spring so that everything's nice and tight in its place. There we go. Okay, and give us a last little whirl to get it started. Now, for some reason, the amplitude is horrible. Like, I don't know what's happening. Maybe it's because of I didn't lubricate the jewels here. I'm just adding some 90-10 to the seconds hand, some HP 1300 to the third wheel, and some 90-10 to the escapement wheel, and closing that up with the cover plate, because maybe this is also a additional end shake source, which could reduce the power which actually ends up in the escapement. So I'll just press this down gently and close up the screw. And now we can lubricate from the back side again. So 90-10 for the minute wheel, for the seconds wheel and the escapement wheel, and HP 1300 for the third wheel. Quick warning, don't lubricate the stones for the pallet fork. They will stay unlubricated. I did end up replacing the balance because the result was not what I wanted. And we will have a little comparison in a second. Now here, a little side-by-side comparison. So on the left, we have the original balance, which had a bent pinion, probably. And on the right, we have the donor balance, which is beating so much more better. It has such a higher amplitude. It really had a big impact on the performance of the watch. Now finally, I'll lubricate the cannon pinion to put on the hour wheel and add the washer on top of that. This is very important because this allows the hour wheel to have some sort of end shake and not fall out of engagement with the translation wheel. Now here I'm just going to clean up the dial with this little Q-tip. I'm not going to go really aggressive on it with any liquids, for example, because I'm pretty sure those will just make the corrosion worse on the dial. So I'm just going to take a little swab at all the corners and the sides and on the surface and the indices, just to make sure that there's no big grime. And if you look at the Q-tip here, I mean, it's a bit dirty, but not too much, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't think it will get any better. We can now come to putting the dial onto the movement. We'll just place it on, and since the movement screws are loose, the dial feet can just simply fall into place, and we just don't have to forget to tighten them like right here. That's the first one, and the second one on the other side, basically. And once that's done, we can take a look at the hands. The hands themselves, they're a bit used. These videos do look pretty horrible. I'm just going to clean them up a bit with the Q-tip as well. I just put them in some Rodico, and I'm just going to clean them off with some wood. And here's the final result. Once that is done, I can just put the hands back on. First the arrow hand, of course. Press that on with the hand presser. Make sure it aligns with 12. And then more importantly, we press on the minute hand. That definitely has to align with 12 because that's the important connection. It's a bit to the right here still. I'll just move it over. Okay, that looks much better, and repress it down to make sure that it's nice and tight in that position. And lastly, the seconds hand, which I also sourced from that one donor movement. It was a bit difficult to find because some of the movements had like a white silver dial, and that's why they had a silver seconds hand, but I found one which had a gold seconds hand, which is the appropriate color. Now let's check the positions. So I can definitely set the positions now. The hands are able to move, and the alignment of the arrow and the minute hand is also, in my opinion, pretty good. And since we don't have a date, we definitely don't have to check if the date jumps, for example, or if I can quick set it. Now we can check the alignment on the 6 o'clock, I think, as well. Okay, that looks really good. Now a side view shows that the minute hand is a bit bent upwards, but if we look at all three hands in total, you can see that they are not touching, and I'll just keep it this way. By me, the hands are super worn as well in total, so I mean, this is the condition they came in. With that out of the way, I'll take a look at the crystal, polishing the crystal up to a nice finish, because these scratches are really big. And for that, we'll first do some preparation work. I'll use some, this is something I call kaftan tape, to tape off the sides on the crystal. So basically everywhere where there's gold, because if I start polishing, there might be a chance that I might polish off the gold plating. That's why taping this off, this is also useful for other polishing or other case finishing techniques. But this is super important because you don't want to ruin the existing color or the edge, for example. So once this is done, I'll just use my little rotary tool and put some felt on it. And I'm using Polywatch here, which is a pretty common abrasive for like hobbyists to polish up their acrylic crystals. And I'll just put a jab on this onto this top surface like this. And I'll just use the rotary tool to just basically rub away the scratches. So you basically just take away a little of the plastic, just little by little, and just make sure to get all these scratches away. And yeah, this is just a time lapse of me doing it. It does get quite dirty, and so I'll definitely clean this afterwards. But the final result looks really good. I mean, just look at it. Like there's some scratches left and some marks, but in total it looks super nice. Now, since the crystal is done, I'm moving on to the actual case, the gold case, and for that, we will just take a quick look here. You can see that there's some scratches, some blemishes, and I won't be able to do a lot about those because I don't want the actual plating to come off. But I'll just take some jeweler's rouge, so it's like a rouge impregnated cloth, and I'll just use it to basically do the same thing on the side of the case. But this time I just have to be sure not to do too much because this thing goes super fast, and I'm just finishing off with some cloth to rub away the impurities and make it shine a bit more. In total, it did kind of increase the optical look of this, but I definitely noticed that the plating is getting weaker, so I can't do this too many times. Once I clean the case, I'll just put this on the dial, and it looks so much better already from the outside. And I'll flip it over to make sure that the dial's all nice and flat in the movement, and I'll fixate the movement in the case with the stem. Now, we talked about the missing movement holder, and while it did look online a bit, this is a picture, for example, where there is a metal movement holder all around the movement in a similar case. So I just went and designed a small little plastic version of this in CAD, and I'm just going to use my 3D printer I have at home to basically reprint this and hopefully make sure that this can work. So after slicing the file and starting my little Prusa Mini, that's the printer I'm using, I can just hopefully hope that this little thing, which I just measured out on the go, actually fits the watch. While it's working, I'm just going to chill a bit and look at it go. Now this is the final thing. It turned out pretty decent. We'll just have to see how well this goes, and we'll just put it onto the move and just gently press down around. And this is basically gonna press in between the case back and the movement holder. So this might actually be enough friction to keep the movement in place. before I close it up, I'll just put it on the time grapher to see how the watch is performing. Okay, the amplitude is pretty nice. The lift angle got off the internet, and the rate is also a bit in the negative. I might want to adjust this a bit into the positive so it's a bit better. And this is the after result. So the amplitude did fall a tiny bit, but the rate is basically around +5, I'd say. So in all positions, I'd say ±5 seconds, hopefully. I didn't check the other positions though. Now I'll just mark the back of the case back with the appropriate date. So when I've done this, so in the future, I might know, okay, it's been 3 years. I'll just do this again, for example, but with so much more knowledge, hopefully. So 15/12/2022, as you can see, the footage is super old. And we'll just close everything up with this, just press it down. Okay, so the movement is basically gone. There's some sound left, but in total, it's pretty nice. Now I bought a nice leather strap to go with the watch, so my dad can just immediately wear it, hopefully, and he likes it. Enjoy the B-roll. Welcome to the end of the video, Watchbangers. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, if there's comments, criticism, any ideas or improvements you guys have, please let me know. And I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.